Hello and welcome to the Safety Goals Podcast with Justin Torres and Charlie One, presented by Injure Free. This is episode 15 with our special guest, Scott Gray. Scott Gray is a member of Minnesota Hockey, along with being the owner of Metro Legal Services. However, the big thing that we really like to focus on in this episode is how he works in protecting youth athletes. One other thing is that we are not going to have Charlie on this episode, but we do have a great guest host who you've heard before in Josh Opiola. And he has an amazing relationship with Scott, and he's going to be able to really take us through Scott's career, what he's done, and also just really emphasize his importance on protecting youth athletes. So, without further ado, let's get into the show. Okay, so we have Scott Gray with us, and Scott, it is a pleasure to have you on this podcast. Me and Josh have been talking about having you on for quite some time, and frankly, I'm glad that it's actually getting done. You have a tremendous role in protecting youth athletes, and I was wondering if you could just kind of go into it a little bit about what you do so that way our guests can have a bit of a knowledge base on your career.
Where do you want to start?
I'm thinking when you first started working for Minnesota Hockey, how did that come about for you? How did you realize that that was something you maybe wanted to do in any regard?
Yeah, so my son, who is now 27 years old, was interested in playing hockey, and at that time I lived in Eagan, so we registered him with the Eagan Hockey Association. And I had no hockey experience whatsoever prior to that. And I rapidly recognized that a lot of work went into running a youth hockey association in terms of volunteers, whether we're talking about board members or coaches or team managers or whatever. So I kind of raised my hand and said, if you guys, I'm not a hockey guy, but if you guys need administrative help, I own a business and, I have some skills in that area. And they encouraged me to run for the Eagan Hockey Board. I submitted an application, which at the time was in the summer when they were having their elections, and they had me put it in a mailbox at the arena that they never checked, and therefore I was never even considered. So when we figured that out, Eagan reached out to District 8 hockey. Minnesota is split up into 13 different districts that govern groups of local associations, somewhere between 8 and 15 local associations. And they needed somebody to get involved with junior gold hockey, which is Minnesota's hockey program for high school age kids that didn't make their high school team. So I got involved with junior gold hockey representing District 6 to the state organization. And the district director of District 8 his name is Rich Rackness. He wasn't, now we're talking 22 years ago when all this was going on. He wasn't that interested in attending Minnesota Hockey Board meetings as a district director, and he started to have me go as his proxy. And I did that for, 4, 5, 6 times. And one of the district director meetings that I attended on his behalf involved discussions about screening and the problems they were having and the expense that they were experiencing and how really messed up the whole situation was. And from my regular line of work, and interestingly, this is how Josh and I got acquainted. Mm-hmm. In my regular line of work, I had a fair amount of experience with background screening. And I kind of raised my hand at this meeting and I said, well, you guys aren't really doing this right. And if you want, I'll talk to somebody and explain how you can do this much better. And this led to that, and that led to this. And the next thing I knew, I was asked to be the chair of the Minnesota Hockey Screening Committee. And so I took that on, and that is what prompted Josh to get involved. I don't know if we want to get into that or it doesn't really make any difference. It's up to you, Josh, but
I think we should. It was fun.
so Josh at the time was working for a professional, screening organization that would sell its services as a vendor to various organizations like Minnesota Hockey. And Josh had already, I think, been involved with his local hockey association, St. Michael Albertville. And I think somehow we never really got into it, but he found out that I was going to take on the screening share responsibilities, and he sort of concluded that I must have been doing that on behalf of my company, such that I would be charging for Minnesota Hockey for those services. And he had the wherewithal to outright call me and confront me with that topic. Because if I recall correctly, it was his position that something like that should have had included or involved some kind of competitive bidding procedure, not just handed over to me because I was involved with Minnesota Hockey. And after we went round and round and round and yelled at each other and a few FUs and KMAs,
yep,
it became clear to Josh, or I finally was able to communicate that this wasn't going to be involving my company in any way, shape, or form. I was just going to see to it that it was done correctly.
Yes.
And in having done so, that went on for a number of years the way we were doing that, and I saved my star within Minnesota Hockey started to rise because I was saving us in the neighborhood of, I don't know, $50,000 a year or something like that, which was, and it was much quicker and much more efficient. It just worked really well.
Yep.
So I was still functioning then at the time as a member of the Junior Gold Board representing District 8, and I was doing the screening stuff. And at that point, a board position opened on the Minnesota Hockey Board, which was at the time Vice President of Publicity and Promotions. And the guy that was doing that had some problems, so he was asked to step down, and I was asked to run to fill his position. And I accepted that challenge, and I got elected. And I think that was 6 or 7 terms ago, and I still hold that position. Those are 3-year terms, so it's been either 18 or 21, something like that, around 20 years. The position is currently called Vice President of Communications and Marketing. We changed the name a little bit, but in that role, I oversee the finances of all of our communications and marketing activities. I have nothing to do with it other than I'm the watchdog over the money. Well, then in 2012, so then I'm doing the screening, and I'm doing the vice president role. Well, then in 2012, that's when the United States Olympic Committee rolled out or had completed the production of the original Safe Sport policy. All right. And the Safe Sport policy was created by the U.S. OC, which, by the way, is now they added Paralympic to their name, so now it's U.S. OPC. But at the time, they were still the United States Olympic Committee. They had run into some problems with USA Swimming in the 2006 to 2008 time frame, in which female athletes who had entered into consensual romantic relationships with male coaches within their swimming clubs were lodging complaints with USA Swimming relative to having ended those relationships, but then alleging that they were suffering retaliation or discrimination or whatever. Like, these coaches were not happy that they broke off the relationship and they were discriminating against them in terms of what events they were allowing them to swim in or what races to swim in, that kind of thing. And at the time, those complaints were routed from USA Swimming to the local clubs, and the local clubs, according to some of these athletes, essentially ignored the complaints or swept them under the rug, or in whatever fashion didn't react properly to the complaints, and a lot of these women sued.
Yep.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think there were 5 or 6 lawsuits, and because they included the United States Olympic Committee in the litigation, that was those were federal lawsuits. And at the end of the day, the judges ruled similarly in those cases, insofar as saying, look, there's liability here. The argument was, well, what control do we have over personal relationships between athletes and coaches and blah, blah, blah. And the judges said, well, look, you have liability here because you don't have any policies or procedures. You don't have any policies that prohibit this kind of conduct. You don't have any policies about how an aggrieved athlete is supposed to complain about these things, or who's supposed to deal with it, who's going to investigate it. You got nothing. So money changed hands. Yep. And of course, in the real world, when money changes hands, it usually comes for legitimate organizations out of the pockets of insurers. And the insurers for the USOC then at the time came back after writing checks and said, look, you guys, if you want liability insurance to cover you for these kinds of, complaints or these kinds of allegations, you got to come up with a policy that these judges say you're lacking.
Yep.
And that became the original Safe Sport policy. So the original policy was created essentially by the USOC. And then the first year that it was done in 2012, they asked USA Hockey to put it into practice as sort of a beta test to see how it worked. And USA Hockey came to Minnesota Hockey because Minnesota is the largest affiliate of USA Hockey. We make up nearly 15% of the whole organization, and there's 32 affiliates. So we were asked to put it in place, and I was tapped to do that because part and parcel of the Safe Sport policy was enhanced screening, improved screening. Mm-hmm. So I took that on in 2012, and essentially I did the first Safe Sport investigations because part of the new Safe Sport policy mandated that when a report came in, it be investigated, and it be investigated by someone other than the local organization from which the complaint emanated. In other words, the policy was designed to say local groups should not have unilateral responsibility or control over a Safe Sport complaint. There needs to be oversight from a higher authority. All right. So we ran Safe Sport that season, and it worked pretty well. And I was asked to write a report about what I thought was good and what I thought was bad. This was for USA Hockey. And I did all that. And so it was called a success. Well, then in the following couple years, 2 to 3 years, depending on how rapidly they reacted, the USOC asked or mandated that the other remaining 49 Olympic sports, and by the way, for those listening that don't quite follow, by virtue of an act in the 70s called the Ted Stevens Amateur Sports Act, that created the United States Olympic Committee, and that was done because there were issues related to disputes between sports organizations over who should be allowed to field teams to represent the United States in world or international or Olympic competitions. And one of the bigger players back then, and still is, was AAU, the Amateur Athletic Union. They were arguing they should be able to send teams and whoever. So anyway, it got to be kind of a mess. So Congress passed this act, Ted Stevens Amateur Sports Act, that created the USOC. And when they did that, they said they have authority to govern all amateur world-bound sports in the United States. And the dictate was they create a national governing body, or NGB, it's commonly referred to now, of each of the sports that they're going to oversee that are going to compete in world competitions. So the Olympic Committee is the boss when it comes to USA Hockey or USA Fencing or US Soccer or whatever. And generally speaking, so if you see a sport that's calling it USA something or US something, it's likely a national governing body of an Olympic sport. All right. So the sport, when the USOPC now says jump, we kind of got to say how high. They run the show. All right. So in 2013, 14, 15, they were mandating that the other 49 Olympic NGBs, national governing bodies, were to put the safe sport policy in practice within their sport. And the design at the time was each sport would supervise, operate, and oversee its own safe sport policies. And for the most part, so that was the case. Well, let's not jump that far yet. So in those couple of years following USA Hockey putting it in place, other sports were reaching out to the USOC saying, how do we do this investigative piece? Because we don't have investigators.
Yep.
And how is this done? And the USOC, having put the operational control over the safe sport policy within each governing body, reached out to USA Hockey. There was one woman there that was kind of running that part of it for the USOC. And she reached out to USA Hockey and said, well, how did you do this investigative piece? And USA Hockey gave her my name. Well, then in the next, it was rapid. Within a year, she was just giving out my name. So a Olympic NGB would contact her and they'd say, how do we do this? And she'd say, call this guy. So I started working for, I don't know, it was very rapidly. I think I had a half a dozen Olympic sports that I was assisting with these investigations. And then within USA Hockey, there are a bunch of kind of standalone entities that are part of USA Hockey, but really don't have their own infrastructure that could handle this kind of stuff. So just within USA Hockey, I started doing investigations for the Tier 1 juniors, which is referred to as the United States Hockey League, the Tier 2 juniors now, which is referred to as the North American Hockey League, the Tier 3 kids, North American 3 Hockey League. So I was doing a number of things within USA Hockey, those groups, and then I was helping, I don't know, like I said, probably a half a dozen other Olympic NGBs. And that kind of was what I was doing between 2012 when it started and 2017 when all the wheels kind of came off in regards to Dr. Larry Nasser. Dr. Larry Nasser was the guy that was both a sports doctor for Michigan State University as well as for USA Gymnastics. And we don't need to get into the details of everything he did, but when all that came to light, Congress got involved because it was such a horrific story, and Congress wanted to know and summoned USOPC officials to testify. Congress wanted to know what happened. What happened with your vaunted safe sport policy? And unfortunately, the USOPC officials who came to testify gave bad answers. They essentially said, hey, we created the safe sport policy, but we don't really have anything to do with it. We leave that up to each sport. They're not our athletes. They're USA Gymnastics athletes. So if you got questions about how this got so messy, you should be talking to USA Gymnastics, not us.
Yeah.
And it just very basically, Congress didn't care much for those answers. I mean, the Congress's interpretation was, hey, get off our back. We don't have anything to do with that. When their belief was, no, you should.
Right.
You are ultimately responsible under this act, the Sports Act. You're responsible for all this. You can't come in here and say, hey, whatever, talk to them. So after this, then the prosecutions came of him and all that, and then the scope of what he had done and the scope of what gymnastics officials did and didn't do and the scope of what the USOP officials didn't do and what everybody knew or didn't know or how they reacted all became fairly scrutinized under the spotlight of public opinion. And as a result, Congress passed the Protect Youth Sports Act or the Safe Sport Authorization Act. It's called a number of different things. But in essence, what that did was it created this new organization since 2017 called the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. And the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, by virtue of that congressional act, was created with exclusive jurisdiction over all safe sport matters. And originally I thought, well, I'm done doing this stuff then. They've created essentially a quasi-federal agency, excuse me, to look into all this.
Right.
Well, then after that got up and running, which if it was designed to be a jet airplane, it functioned like Orville Wright's three-wing thing that flew for 80 feet and crashed in the ground, so to speak. It became apparent that they weren't ready or capable of dealing with the multitude of the cases or the magnitude thereof. And so what they did shortly after they opened was they said, look, although we have exclusive jurisdiction over all safe sport matters, we're only going to be able to deal with.
Really quick. And I just want to kind of emphasize this point is two things. One is I think I don't think people have any idea how in depth and how long this kind of the historic aspects of the Safe Sport Act have been coming together. The vast majority of people, I think this is the first time that people are actually going to be able to see the timeline of the kind of the mess that has been going on, because people just make this automatic assumption that this was just magically happened and it appeared and yay, we've got to follow all these things. In extent it did, but it's really been kind of brewing for a long time. And then second is that the opinion on the Center for Safe Sport is not your personal opinion. This is in fact what was given to you when you testified in front of Congress. That their lack of faith and support of the center is obvious, right? That they just need help. It's not that they're doing the wrong. Their ideas or ideals are incorrect. Is that they just don't have the capability or ability to function as maybe their initial thought was. Is that kind of correct?
Sports are in full swing 24/7, which means athletes are bound to get injured. Injure-Free is a software platform used by youth sports organizations and schools that was developed to help coaches, parents, and administrators communicate injuries that occur and ensure a safe return to play. These sports safety networks are essential for sports teams working to provide the safest possible environment for their families. For more information or to schedule a demo, please visit www.injurefree.com. That's www.injurefree.com.
Absolutely. There's no ill intent on their part.
Yeah.
It's just a functionality thing. Yeah. And I don't think they recognized, I don't think Congress recognized, nor did the center when it was first opened,
mm-hmm.
the vast numbers of these things that occur.
Right.
And
So in that vastness, so you've seen this on the inside, right? And a lot of people that are listening to this have no clue about the vastness of the reports that come in. So let me ask you this. So if I am an organization, you mentioned AAU before. So if I'm a member of AAU and my kid's an AAU basketball player, do they have access to the Center for Safe Sport?
no, the Safe Sport Authorization Act, Protect Youth Sports Act, created the center to address Olympic family organizations.
Okay.
But part and parcel of that legislation included that non-Olympic youth sports organization must also abide by a similar policy.
All right. That being said, what the hell do they do? So they don't have access to anything under the sun that the USOPC bodies have. Okay. The USOPC bodies represent what? 10%, 20% of the athletes that are in this country?
Yeah, I would say less than that. Youth athletes, okay. Less than that.
Yeah.
Because we got to keep in mind that most Olympic sports don't include minors.
Right.
Soccer does, hockey does, and a few others do, but most of those 50 Olympic sports are primarily adults. And so when we're talking about youth numbers, I would suspect it's far less than, it's less than 20%. It has to be. I would even think less than 10. So the question is, how do these non-Olympic family sports abide by that legislation? And by the way, part of the legislation included civil penalties. In other words, you can get sued if you don't. Right. If you don't do this right. Now, I don't know if I'm correct, but someone has suggested that there haven't been any lawsuits brought in the non-Olympic world against an organization for not abiding by that legislation. In other words, I don't know that anyone's watchdogging any of it. Okay. I don't know that parents of kids who are involved in non-Olympic family sports have any idea that it even exists and that they could bring some kind of a complaint along those lines. Now, that's not to say no one's abiding by it. I do a lot of work for example, USA Powerlifting, and although they have the USA designation, they are not an Olympic sport. USA Weightlifting is the Olympic sport of the weightlifting world. But USA Powerlifting early on said, well, we're a little worried about this legislation, and we want to make sure that we abide by it and do things the right way. And they contacted me and said, we'd like you to help us do this stuff. So they've been one of my, longer standing clients now, just because, and they have nothing to do with the Olympics, because they want to protect their athletes and do what they're supposed to do and not face any liability for not doing so.
Certainly. So all of that being said coming from a lay person, I want lay people to understand this concept. So basically the Olympic movement has their stuff relatively in order. Relatively. I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts of this, but I'm going to just kind of on a top level is the USOPC organizations underneath them theoretically have their stuff in order and are, all quote unquote safe sport compliant during their audits and everything else that comes from it. So my concern comes from a parent of a non-USOPC organization. Not only do they not know this is going on, but they also have no idea that they have an avenue to pursue, I don't even want to say litigation, because litigation is like the last thing that's happened that you really don't want to have happen anyways, because that means something terrible has happened to their child. So the USOPC and the Congress have put something into place that only a handful of people actually know about. And the vast majority of the people that are affected by this have no clue that this is even available and has to be enforced at their local level.
That's correct.
Okay.
It's 100% correct.
So how in God's name Can we fix it?
Well, let me interrupt, Josh. Unless
Yeah.
it happens to be a sport that took all, like I was referencing USA Powerlifting, that took all this very seriously
Mm-hmm.
and enacted their own policies to abide by that legislation. So we
Right.
can't say none of them are doing it.
Okay.
I don't know what AAU does. I don't know what all these private organizations do. I'm not running around trying to find new clients, so I don't
Right.
approach them and say, hey, what are you doing? Can I help you?
Yeah.
So I really don't know, but I know a lot of them when I do talk to somebody, they're stunned by learning the vast array of things that you're obligated to abide by and put in place and monitor and
Yeah.
so clearly and in fact, there was discussion when I testified in DC about the need to better enhance the knowledge of that legislation, because the very point was made, if we're not talking about an Olympic sport, really everyone else is asleep at the wheel on this thing.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
and Scott, you actually said in that meeting that you felt the U.S. Center for Safe Sport and the NGBs need to have a better relationship, and that will ultimately allow for a better harmonious, transfer of information, hopefully not having these events happen. Could you elaborate on maybe what you feel a good first step for that kind of relationship to improve might be?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't want to be overly critical of the center, because I would outright say they're doing the best they can with what they've been given to an
Right.
extent. However, if I was going to be critical, what I would say is if you conjure up for the listeners the image of a guy with a greedy guy with a pile of coins on a table in front of him with his arms wrapped around him, like, these are mine, get away from me. The center functions. Yeah, there's a good one. The center functions like that to a certain extent. So on the one hand, they have this exclusive jurisdiction over everything, but then what they did initially and still are doing is saying, look, there's so much of this, we're only going to deal with sexualized and or child abuse type behavior. So if you guys, as people within the 50 national governing bodies, are made aware of any of those types of complaints, you're obligated to report that to us. Mm-hmm. Anything else that's not sexualized or child abuse related, meaning an adult doing something to a child abuse wise, then you guys don't have to report that to us, and you can investigate and adjudicate those cases on your own. And further, if we're made aware of a case like that coming from your national governing body, we will most likely, although we'll accept a complaint along those lines, we'll most likely decline jurisdiction of it and send it back to you to investigate and adjudicate.
Yep.
The biggest problem with the center is there's two big problems. The first is they're far too slow. On the cases that they take jurisdiction of, meaning there's some sexualized element or child abuse element, they often can take over a year to investigate and arrive at a conclusion. That's the first problem. And why is that a problem? Well, if the bad actor who's being investigated wasn't issued any kind of an interim suspension or prohibition from interacting with athletes, and they are truly a bad actor, then for the next year or year and a half, they're continuing to behave inappropriately to every athlete potentially that they come into contact with. So that's one problem. And and part and parcel of that first problem, if you're the accused, whether you're a coach or an athlete, and you didn't do anything wrong, it's a bad faith complaint or whatever, and maybe you did get interim measures like someone suspended you, so now you're not able to participate, and this investigation goes on and on and on and on and on, and it languishes and nothing happens, you're out of the sport for a year and a half. And that might cost you a job if that's what you do for a living. So that's one problem. The second big problem is that upon completion of their investigation of the cases they take jurisdiction of, somewhere between 70 and 80% of the time, their conclusion is that they just closed the case with no findings,
Right.
which they refer to as an administrative closure. And one of the things I testified to the commission about was, and in fact, the CEO of the center testified right before me and acknowledged that they had experienced very few bad faith complaints. In other words, most of the complaints they believe are made in good faith.
Yeah.
My comment to the panel was, how can 7 or 8 out of 10 complaints made by our constituents with legitimate concerns about misconduct, whether it be against a coach or a teammate or another athlete in the sport, how can 7 to 8 out of 10 wind up with this organization not being able to find any actionable misconduct?
Right.
And in fact, by virtue of taking a year and a half to accomplish this, that's where all the witnesses disappear or lose interest or don't want anything to do with it. And in fact, I'm dealing, and I won't use obviously any names, but we have a hockey case in Minnesota where a coach, 46-year-old coach, asked a 16-year-old player, female player, to send him pictures of herself in a bikini. All right. So this came to light, and in his case, I suspended him. I have the authority within Minnesota Hockey to issue suspensions in these cases. I reported him to the center, and the center took jurisdiction of the case and left the suspension in place. Okay, good. He's out of the sport, and now they can figure out what to do with him. Surprisingly, the center reacted rather rapidly on this one, and they reached out to the father of this girl, and she had submitted a written statement about what happened. And there was video evidence in terms of screenshots of Instagrams and texts. And they reached out to the father and wanted to interview the daughter, and the daughter has been pretty traumatized by this whole thing. And the father said, well, she doesn't really want to talk about this anymore. And I ask you to respect her rights. She's upset. She's scared of this guy now, both because she thought he was a nice guy, and now she realizes he might be a predator, and she doesn't know how to process that. And she's afraid for his kids and his wife because all these things the 16-year-old girl has gone through. So he said, we respectfully request that she not have to be involved in this process. We've given you everything we have. You know the story. You have her statement. You have the evidence. And the center said, no, she's unwilling to talk to us. We're going to administratively close the case.
Not many youth sports administrators began their careers with the dream of negotiating insurance rates. Most have the love and passion for the game and saw it as a way to inspire the next generation of youth athletes. However, nowadays insurance can be the single greatest cost for a youth sports organization. At American Sports Insurance Services, we've done the work for you and created the single most comprehensive youth sports insurance program on the market. We did it by aggregating the largest youth sports injury database in the world. Let us do the heavy lifting and represent you for all your risk management needs. For more information or to get a quote, visit www.getamsis.com. That's www.getamsis.com.
There's an example where I can see that to be maybe more the case if they're reaching out finally a year and a half later after an athlete has complained about a coach. And the athlete in the year and a half since they made the report has moved on to another organization and has another coach and is happy with the new coach and has gotten over whatever misconduct the earlier coach was committing. And the athletes still harbor some concerns that the old coach is influential and he can have a negative impact on her career or his career. I don't mean to limit the, and then when the center finally reaches out a year later after the complaint was made, they say, look, I don't want anything to do with this.
Yeah. And kind of, Scott, as you're talking about this, is like your parent radar goes off, right? Is like there's a couple of things that are just like, as a parent, your parental radar's going off, going, are you serious? This is obvious. This is cut and dry. This is no issues here. And plus, they're not a quote unquote judicial authority, right? Is they are not part of the DOJ, as far as my understanding is, so they don't have to quite follow all the rules of the DOJ. And I could be totally wrong here, but this coach wasn't offered his Miranda. He was never put under arrest. The center has all of the data and information that they are required to have. In theory, logic dictates that they could make a decision without having to involve this child. And I want to emphasize child here, as opposed to an adult. This was not an adult crime where the man or woman, says, I'm just done with this. It'll take care of itself. This is a child. So I don't understand their needs. So all of that being said, how do we fix it? What's the best course? If you had a magic 8-ball, or you had the ability to see into the future, what would you want to instantaneously implement?
Well, that's a softball question, Josh, because
I try, Scott.
You're absolutely right. They have no law enforcement authority. The only authority they have is to ban someone from participating in an Olympic sport. That's the only authority they have. All right?
Yeah.
So the simplest fix for this, and this was talked about before the commission, not by me, but by others, is that when the whole thing was designed, when the whole policy was designed in 2010, 11, and it's the case today, the level of proof to arrive at a conclusion of whether or not misconduct took place is what is most likely to have happened. A 51% level of conclusion versus and that's a civil standard.
Yeah.
Like in a lawsuit versus the criminal standard of beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yep.
So notwithstanding that the policy itself and the center understands that their burden of proof is preponderance, meaning 51%, what's most likely to have happened, they seem to function from the perspective of it's got to be beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
And so this instant case that I was just talking about, it's all there. You got a statement from the victim. You got all the screenshots of the text and the nasty things he said to her, but because she doesn't want to verbally speak with somebody in Colorado,
right,
retelling this ugly story, and I mean, let's be clear, there's way more uglier stories than hers. Right. And God bless her that hers isn't more ugly than it could have been. But yet for a 16-year-old girl getting thrust into this whole arena of guys like me and their hockey association and all this stuff, cops, because I reported that to law enforcement, the cops interviewed her. She's overwhelmed by all this. And now you guys call and you want her to tell the whole story that she wrote down on a piece of paper. Fine. Ask if she wants to. And if she doesn't, then say, all right, we respect that. And sir, thank you for bringing this to our attention. And we'll go ahead and adjudicate it. And then you get somebody who wasn't involved in the investigation to read everything. And say, the guy's 46. He's asking a 16-year-old athlete for bikini pictures. Bad deal.
Right.
and then issue your judgment. And if he doesn't like it, then he can go through the appeal process that's made part and parcel of this whole Say Sport deal. And if he doesn't prevail in the end, too bad. Then you don't get to be a coach.
Hi, my name is Charlie Wund, and I'm the CEO and founder of the Agency for Student Health Research. When I started the company over a decade ago, I aimed to help reduce injuries within youth sports. Since then, Injure-Free was created as a risk management software platform and has grown to become one of the leading injury reporting platforms used by thousands of athletic organizations and schools nationwide. Our expansive education library and reporting technology provides the tools administrators need to take the pain out of risk management. As a former high school athletic director and youth sports organizer, I understand the regulatory compliance requirements and need for individual accountability. Our goal is to provide a service that does better than checking the box. For more information or to schedule a demo, please visit www.injurefree.com. That's www.injurefree.com.
So basically, is everything that is written within the Protect Young Youth Athletes and the Safe Sport Act basically is in a lot of cases, I'm not going to use absolutes, but in a lot of cases, what you're saying is exactly what just happened with this young lady here in Minnesota is the case. So theoretically, if this is true, there are potential, there's always going to be a potential predator out there, regardless of sport, regardless of life, regardless of what you're doing. There is the fact that predators are out there. But they willingly and knowingly said they administratively dismissed this case or closed this case with the evidence that was presented to them. So as a parent, I'm yelling out, I have no faith in the center. And as a parent, I'm going to say, I have no faith in this Safe Sport Act. And as a parent, I would be one to potentially call my attorneys to say that they knowingly let a potential predator out on the streets.
Well, so Justin asked the question, problems. What problems am I identifying? And I identified one, it takes them too long, and two, they too frequently administratively close cases, which means they're not going to do anything. You asked the question, Josh, how to fix it.
Yep.
So again, two answers. The first was what I just gave, which was insist that the center adopt the what's most likely to have occurred level of evidence and don't dismiss cases or administratively close cases when a claimant or a victim doesn't want to talk about it anymore, especially a minor. And then the second fix, and this is what I testified to in my statement, is that in the cases, let's say they don't want to do that. They want to stick doing it the way they do it. They're only going to, if the claimant doesn't want to talk, then we're not going to pursue it. Then what I had proposed to this commission was then in those cases, when you administratively your administrative closure from the center confers immediate jurisdiction of the case on the relevant governing body of the sport it came from. In other words, if you guys don't want to pursue it, we should be able to. And as 100%. Currently constructed, when they administratively close a case, which again, people is 70 to 80% of them,
Jesus.
We don't even we get told that let's say I'm the guy being investigated, which they refer to as the respondent. USA Hockey is first knowing that Scott Gray is a respondent in a case that the center's taken jurisdiction of. But they don't tell USA Hockey what I supposedly did. They just let them know that they're investigating me. At the time that they administratively close a case, they would let's again say it's me and USA Hockey, they would send USA Hockey an email that says, hey, just letting you know, this case we told you that we were investigating Scott Gray about has been administratively closed. They don't say what I was accused of. They don't say anything, what they did, who they talked to, how they arrived at a conclusion to close it. So my position is, at the point that you guys have taken a case and looked at it, and you decide you're not going to do anything with it, then send it back to us and let us deal with it. Why do you care? And see, that's where I was talking about this Scrooge McDuck hugging his money thing. Why are you so fixated on we're such a bunch of dopes that we should have the right to review the complaints against which Jerice Cologne testified are, for the most part, good faith reports. We should have the right to satisfy our constituents that we're on top of this thing and review whatever it is they complained about. And maybe we want to take some action. Just because they didn't doesn't mean we shouldn't be able to. That's the biggest fix.
Because it still could be code of conduct, right? I mean, it may not be of a sexual nature, but it still could violate USA Hockey's code of conduct and behavior that is obviously, very, very important. And that the world is not, we've seen a lot of these, Scott, over our years, right?
Yeah.
You and I've seen a lot.
You're right. It could be a code of conduct issue, but it could be a safe sport issue. My point being, they're closing out safe sport issues, legitimate safe sport issues, because they feel they can't prove it. Or there isn't enough evidence there to prove it because the victim or the claimant doesn't want to talk to him 6 months later or a year later.
Yeah.
Or she's 16 years old or 10 years old or 12 years old and she's freaked out by this whole thing. So the two problems, again, they're too slow. That's one thing. And that allows everybody to keep doing what they're doing. And they administratively close way too many cases for, I don't think, good reasons. The fixes are expand your treatment of evidence and go with preponderance and or cede those cases to us when you're going to administratively close them and let us do our thing.
Right.
If those 4 topics were addressed, this whole thing would work much better. And my proposal to the commission was the center limit the cases take jurisdiction of to only those cases that involve mandatory reports to law enforcement or child protective services. And I'll tell you, I wished I would have been asked more about that, but part of my point of that, had I been asked, and I'll just give you another example. I had a case in California. Pee-wee hockey players were at an out-of-town tournament, and at night were like they do. Josh, you've been in there 100 times, swimming in the pool while the parents are in the hospitality room. Correct. So one of the boys on this Pee-wee team was a little heavy, and one of his teammates swam up behind him and squeezed his breasts in the pool. And the kid didn't like that. He told his mom, and his mom made a Safe Sport complaint. And I contacted the Center for Safe Sport, and I ran through it with somebody quick because I didn't think I needed to report that.
Yeah.
And I talked to this intake person at the center, and they said, no, you need to report that. And I said, well, can I ask why? And they said, breasts are breasts. It doesn't matter if a boy squeezes or pinches a boy's breast or a boy and a girl or a girl and a, whatever. Yeah. Now I'm 61 and I'm a little, old school and conservative, and we had a term for that type of behavior when we were kids. You did it in school every day, all day long, Yeah. But I said, all right, I'll report it. And as part and parcel of that, I suspended the kid that did it because the center was characterizing that as a sexual assault. And then because they were doing that, I had to report it to law enforcement too. Now, these are 12-year-old boys. So I'm talking to law enforcement. The guy's got to be, it was a sheriff. The sheriff's like, you got to be kidding me. You're reporting this? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, all right, well, here's your report number. I'm not doing anything with this. And I said, I don't care. I don't expect you to. What are you going to charge? It's kids goofing around in the water.
Yeah.
But I suspended that kid, and the center didn't conclude that. They administratively closed it after that hockey season. This was a couple seasons ago. That kid ended it. He didn't get to play hockey the rest of the year because he squeezed another boy's boob in the pool. Yeah. And my point to the commission, if they asked me what I was talking about, was that's not behavior. First of all, that's not sexualized behavior.
No. And
second, whether he pinched his boob or pinched his ear or pinched his nose, he's goofing around.
Mm-hmm.
And I did manage to get in. There's a difference between misconduct and abuse.
Yep. Right.
The center should deal with real abuse, not misconduct of 12-year-olds goofing around in a pool.
Yeah.
Now,
otherwise they don't have nearly enough money and not nearly enough investigators, right? And
no.
Because that locker room stuff is, as you and I both know, is yes, there are some things that are just taping, doing all that kind of stuff, but the vast majority of them is just boys and girls in this one, and they monkeying around, just horseplay, things like that, which is, it could be construed as misconduct and probably is written as misconduct within individuals' handbooks and, player procedures and player protocol and coach and team protocols, that they potentially have violated that. But escalating that type of misconduct, as you were saying, up to the highest level and highest authority seems like a gross misuse of energies and resources, and on the opposite side is, Scott, I could argue both sides, right? Is you can make an argument on both sides because it's like, okay, that's where it starts. We want to nip it in the bud. We want to stop any of these types of shenanigans before they even start. And we're going to make a damn example out of this kid, which suspending the kid for the remainder of the year. Did that kid ever come back and play again?
Yeah, the next season because they administratively closed it.
Yeah, I'm surprised the kid came back, to tell you the truth.
Well, and so again, that's not abuse. That's misconduct. Yeah. And you don't need a quasi-federal agency, like you just said, investigating kids goofing around.
Right.
Now, is it appropriate for what that kid did? No. But the answer is, hey, let's say you want to be really harsh with the kid. You say you shouldn't have done that. You're sitting out the next 2 games.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you're going to come back, and if you do anything like that again, then we're going to pound you.
Yeah.
Or, more reasonably, I would view it as knock it off.
Yeah.
Don't do that. If you do that again, we're going to get rid of you. You've been fairly warned. Fair warning. Quit it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those are those 4 cornerstones that we've been talking about are how you fix this. Now, the center has an unwillingness. It's seemingly an unwillingness to listen. They don't want to hear this stuff. It's like, again, that huddled frame over the pile of coins. We're all trying to do the right thing. We're all trying to do the same thing. We're trying to keep kids safe and eliminate, to the extent that we can, misconduct. So how about be a little more cooperative and work together and see if we can't figure out better ways to deal with this?
Absolutely. Well, Scott, one thing we really like to do when we're wrapping up the show is we like to ask each one of our guests, if you could change one thing in youth sports overnight, just snap your fingers and it's done, what might that be? And it could absolutely be something that we've already been talking about. I think you brought up some great ones. But if you have anything in your mind that you would change overnight for youth sports, what would that possibly be?
Well, Josh, you should answer too, Josh. But from my perspective, I think, given what I do within this youth sports arena, I would like to see a stiffening of rules relative to punishment when misbehavior occurs. I am a fan of warning the first time, done the second time.
Mm-hmm.
if like, for example, there's countries where if you get a DWI, you go to prison forever.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of DWIs in those countries, right? You
Yep.
eliminate the behavior by virtue of the recognition that if you misbehave, you're done.
Yeah.
And we are all too accommodating, I think, of second chances or third chances or fourth chances. So I would like it to be clear to parents. We know your kids are going to do stuff that they shouldn't, and we're going to tolerate that once. Mm-hmm. And if it happens again after we've warned you that, then I'm sorry, but there isn't enough room here for your kid to misbehave within our organization, and you don't have a right to be here.
Yep.
This isn't the public schools. You don't have a right to be here.
No, it's a privilege.
It's a privilege to play for whatever hockey association, St. Michael, Albertville. And if your kid can't behave and follow the rules, we just don't want you.
Totally
That's
agree.
what I would do.
Awesome. I think that is a great choice to make. And yeah, there are a lot of organizations that give too many second chances to individuals that frankly have proven that they're not worthy of that second chance. So I think that you make a great point there.
Mm-hmm. I think, and the response to that is, Scott, I totally agree. You and I have talked about this many times. I am not a big fan of the term zero tolerance, because it bleeds tolerance, or lack of tolerance. When in this world, we need to be tolerant and understanding and as compassionate as we can be. I think one of the biggest things that has been lost in this world is communication and discipline. The fact that you need to be able to talk to these children, and discipline them to a level, not being a parent. Okay. I don't want to even come close to being someone's parent. That's not it. That's not my job. That's not my responsibility to parent a kid I'm coaching. I am their coach. I am to help them, play a sport and hopefully become a better person at the end of the day. That's my job as a coach. My job is not to parent. But with all of that being said, is with that responsibility comes discipline on the team and on everything else. And you should, as an organization, be able to enforce said discipline. Because I think in the long term, we're going to get better adults and better functioning people. And we have lost that ability as coaches and administrators to enforce any type of discipline in this culture. And I'm not saying being heavy-handed. I'm saying being tolerant. Completely tolerant of situations, and educating and doing our best to educate these kids to be better adults, so they can fall in love with the sport, whatever sport it is, so they fall in love with it, enjoy it for the rest of their lives. And they're going to get that by getting a little bit of course correction. I'm not talking about breaking out corporal punishment. That's not at all what I'm saying. It's about course correction. If kids are doing stupid things, it's our obligation as coaches and parents and teachers and adults to correct said course. That's it. It's not to parent their kid. It's not at all. It's to correct said course. I think that would be a wonderful thing to do. On the safe sport realm is we need to enforce the laws that are there. We need the ability, as Scott said, if the center does not, they administratively close things, this needs to get down to the local administration. Whether it's USA Hockey, whether it's Minnesota Hockey, whether it's, USA Baseball to a Little League Baseball, and we miss that. Little League Baseball doesn't follow the center. So Little League Baseball and USA Baseball need to be on the same page here to enforce these things. And in order to do that, it's all about course correction. We have the ability, and what Scott's doing is amazing because he is course correcting what the center and what the Safe Sport Act has omitted. And I think his voice is something that needs to be heard and needs to be listened to. I mean, hearing something's one thing, listening to it is a different thing. We've got to listen to what's being said, and we need to get that word out as best we possibly can.
I couldn't agree more, Josh. Absolutely could not agree more. Well, Scott, we want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join Josh and I. We had a great time. We learned so much, and I know that our listeners are definitely much more well-versed on all the Olympic movement issues that have been prevailing us. So thank you so much.
I appreciate you inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity. And, I've said a million times, this isn't some giant money grab thing. This is just, I think people need to, I can't coach. So I like kids. I like being involved with youth sports. Kids are our future. And I think it's a noble cause to do what we can do to keep them, whether it's physically or emotionally, healthy and safe. And so it's important for people to listen to this stuff and think about it and keep pushing in the right direction so we can get to where we need to be.
Awesome. Well,
Thanks again.
thank you so much for your time.
All right.
Keep doing what you're doing, Scott.
Will do. Good talking to you guys.
Yep.
You too. Take care.
We would like to thank you all for listening to today's episode of the Safety Goals Podcast, presented by Injury Free. I'm your host, Justin Torres. To listen to other episodes of the Safety Goals Podcast, check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.